this is the most catastrophic budget from the most inept government that we've seen, certainly in my lifetime. Now, the idea that you could increase taxes on housing and somehow get more housing was always just crackers. What we have seen as an immediate response to the budget has been a substantial fall in property prices right around Australia. The government is trying to spin this as some kind of advantage to young home buyers, but the truth is that young home buyers who got into the market recently are already discovering that they've got negative equity in their homes. And for the rest of us, the biggest single asset that we've got has suddenly lost perhaps 10% of its value.
The Australian way of life is under threat like never before. Sectarian violence is rife on our streets. The political class is silencing mainstream Australians under the guise of hate speech. And the media, universities and major civic organisations continue to fan the flames of division. Australia is without leadership and Australians are losing hope. 2026 will be the year that defines the future of our great nation. Are we up to the task? Well, hello, Tony, and g'day to all of our viewers and listeners. Great to be back. A lot to talk about. We're going to be discussing the continued fallout from the government's budget, the Anti-Semitism Royal Commission, the visit of the Indian Prime Minister Modi, as well as Cricket Australia saying we can't have the anthem on Australia Day, plus some international matters relating to the latest developments in Iran, Tony's attendance of the ARC conference in London, and plus Tony's going to give us a very special update on the latest developments from within the Liberal Party in his capacity as president. So Tony, great to be back with you.
Yes, Dan, I'm sorry we've missed a couple of weeks, but there is, as you say, a lot to talk about. So great to be back with you and our listeners.
Yes, we'll make up for lost time, no doubt about it. So why don't we kick off on the economic front with the government's budget fallout and the consequences of it. We've seen over the last couple of weeks, obviously house prices taking a hit, in part due to the uncertainty of investors not wanting to get into the market because of the higher taxes that they'll likely face, which will likely have more flow-on impacts throughout the economy. We've seen a lot of issues for startups, tech companies, and those who want to invest to get ahead in our economy. So, Tony, interested in your perspective now that we've had a few weeks since the budget has been passed, how do you think it's playing out in our economy and society?
Well, Dan, I think this is the most catastrophic budget from the most inept government that we've seen, certainly in my lifetime. Now, the idea that you could increase taxes on housing and somehow get more housing, the idea that you could increase taxes on investment and somehow get more investment was always just crackers. Now, what we have seen as an immediate response to the budget has been a substantial fall in property prices right around Australia. The government is trying to spin this as some kind of advantage to young home buyers, but the truth is that young home buyers who got into the market recently with perhaps a 5% deposit are already discovering that they've got negative equity in their homes. And for the rest of us who have been in the market for the longer term, the biggest single asset that we've got has suddenly lost perhaps 10% of its value. Now, let's suppose you're the average Sydney-sider whose house is worth $1.5 million. That's $150,000 that you have lost from your total assets. This is a disaster. I know that houses are expensive. I know that over time, the multiple of average weekly earnings required to buy a house has gone up. But if there's one thing worse than house prices rising, it's house prices falling, because that attacks the prosperity and the security of almost every Australian. What we need to do, if we want to help young people into a home, is get wages up, and that means getting productivity up. If we want to boost prosperity, we've got to actually get the economy running better. And that means not saying no to mineral developments. It means not adding more and more red tape and green tape to project sponsors. And that's what this government just doesn't get. They don't understand that in the end, government doesn't create prosperity, business creates prosperity. And this idea that you can somehow tax your way to prosperity is simply wrong. It's never worked in the past. It will never work in the future. It's against the iron laws of human behaviour.
Mm. Isn't it the case, though, that particularly in the major cities, I mean, over the last 10, 15 years, that the increase to house prices has been pretty substantial? I would have thought if, you've say had a house for 10 years and then it drops back a couple of percent, I mean, is that really going to affect those individuals that much? I mean, house prices do need to drop back a bit, don't they?
Look, I am not in favour of prices continuing to outpace wages. What I'm in favour of is productivity going up, wealth going up, and our economy getting stronger. I want wages to grow faster than house prices, but we're not going to get that from the policies of the current government. Um, Dan, ask yourself this. If your house is worth, say, $1 million, do you want it suddenly to be worth just $900,000? And I think the clear answer would be no.
Well, no, I don't. But at the same time, you're talking about a 20-year consideration, not just something overnight. But I do take your point. But I think it's one of those issues that if you own a home, you also want your kids and your grandkids to be able to get into a home. And so that's the tension that exists there. But the other point I want to raise on the house price front is, of course...
Just before we leave this, I mean, again, this is at the heart of the current government's problem. They are always playing off different groups against each other. They are always trying to divide our society. Now, at the moment, they're trying to play off young people who are supposedly disadvantaged against old people who have supposedly had it so good for so long. Now, it's true that people like me have lived through the best years of this country, but the answer is not to somehow punish people in their 50s and 60s. The answer is to bring back the kind of sensible economic policies that produced the glory days, the reform days, if you like, of the Hawke and Howard era, when people's wealth was increasing in a way that it's not today. I just think it's incredibly important that rather than set up a class war divide, a generation war divide, a gender war divide, a migrant versus native war divide, we've actually got to come together as a country under sensible, decent policies which people are prepared to explain and then implement.
Mm. Well, on the topic of division, we've also seen that in the cultural space as well as the economic space. And we've had the Prime Minister of India, Modi, in Australia over the last week or 2 weeks. And notionally, this was about trade and investment opportunities and in particular a trade deal when it comes to exporting Australian uranium for India to be able to use for civilian purposes. But it also did very much seem that there was a very strong domestic political angle to this. I think there's this, relatively nasty form of sectarian and ethnic politics that's being played out. Did you see it through that framework, or did you see the Prime Minister of India's visit slightly differently?
Well, I guess for me, there were 2 points to the Indian Prime Minister's visit. The first is that India is a rising democratic superpower, and I think it's important that Australia has the best possible relations with the emerging democratic superpower, given the challenge of communist China and given the, I suppose, understandable questions that are currently being posed about the reliability of the United States as a strategic partner. Questions that I don't entirely share myself, but which I can understand people have. So that's the first point. Better relations between Australia and India, or even better relations with India, are all to the good. Second point, and I guess this is my political point, is here you have Anthony Albanese and Narendra Modi quite properly celebrating the greatest sales of Australian uranium, coal, and gas to India. Fantastic. Great. But if it's right to use Australian uranium, coal, and gas in India, why not use more of them here in Australia? And I think that that visit really highlighted the absurdity of this government's position. Why is it right to use uranium in India and somehow wrong to use uranium in Australia? Now, on the other point you raised, Dan, I suppose the domestic political ramifications of the Indian Prime Minister's visit. Look, I don't agree with this view that somehow Australians of Indian background are natural Labor voters. I suspect that at the last election, contrary to one or two pollsters' observations, it was pretty much a 50-50 split. My sense of just about every migrant community, including the Indian one, is that they come to this country looking for a better life. And a better life normally means getting involved with small business, getting your kids the best possible education, and a strong focus on the family. Small business, education, and family, those concerns, if anything, should make you more inclined to vote Liberal than the other way, given that all of that self-reliance, self-improvement mindset is very much at the heart of the Liberal Party, as anyone who's carefully studied Sir Robert Menzies' "We Believe" statement would know. So I can understand Prime Minister Modi wanting to go to a big event to give Australians of Indian background a chance to see him. I can understand Australian politicians wanting to be part of it. In the end, though, it doesn't matter what our ethnicity, doesn't matter whether we've been here for 7 or 8 generations or for 60-odd thousand years, or whether we've just come out of the citizenship ceremony. Every single Australian needs to be on Team Australia, not simply living in Hotel Australia. And my sense of the vast majority of Australians of Indian background is that they've come to this country because they appreciate what we have to offer, and they've embraced this country with enthusiasm.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And the other thing is the social and cultural values of new migrants typically is more on the conservative side of the equation. I mean, when we look at something as an example like the Voice to Parliament referendum, exit polling shows that those who were recent migrants actually voted no in a greater proportion than native-born Australians, in part because many new migrants have come from countries where ethnic and racial separatism is the norm, and they come to a country like Australia where they're promised equality, and then they're forced to vote in a referendum where they're asked, do you want to be separate and different based on race? And of course, they voted no to that. So that's, I think, another component of the values that a lot of migrants bring to our country.
Completely correct, Dan. Completely correct. The idea that somehow you were a better Australian if you had some ancestry stretching back 60,000 or 50,000 years, I think that was very unsettling to a lot of migrant people. And it was totally contrary to the traditional message, which is as long as you are committed to Australia, as long as you're having a go, well, you're an absolute first-class Australian from the moment you take on citizenship. And I think that's the right message, and I never want to see it change.
The other thing, of course, that not just talking about Australians of Indian background, but migrants in general and many across our society that have in common is sport. And cricket in particular is something that's really been a glue to our society over many, many years. I think cricket and footy have really played such an important role where people can rub shoulders together side by side, no matter who you are, where you're from, how much money you've got in your bank account. We're all equal on the sporting field. And this is one of the things that frustrates me to no end, is when sporting codes, particularly our national sporting codes like cricket, intervene in social and political debates. And of course, the latest development is Cricket Australia saying, yes, we're going to have a cricket match on Australia Day with the Big Bash, but no, we're not going to have the national anthem sung. I mean, I think this is absolutely disgraceful. It's another example of how these woke sporting codes are dividing us rather than sticking to the fact that they should be providing sport as a opportunity for Australians to come together. They keep on doing these things to divide us. I think that their funding from state and federal government should be cut and ceased until they actually get on board with the message that, Australia is in your name, and if you're not going to back Australia, then Australia is not going to back you. I've had an absolute gutful of this nonsense. What do you reckon?
Well, Dan, I think that your feelings are absolutely understandable, and I suspect they'd be shared by nearly every Australian who thinks about this issue. There's no doubt that all of these bodies do receive quite a lot of government funding, and I don't think it would be a bad thing at all for the Prime Minister to pick up the phone and say, good on you, Cricket Australia, for having an important game on Australia Day, but there's no point having something on Australia Day and not singing the national anthem at the very least. So come on, do us all a favour, get with the program, sing the national anthem, support Australia Day, and if the Prime Minister is as enthusiastic for our national symbols and a national day as he says he is, pick up the phone. Come on, Albo, pick up the phone and get Cricket Australia to do the right thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. But instead he's talking about welcome to country and that he's going to solidify the practice of welcome to country. So I don't know if he's going to stand up for, the Australian flag, Australia Day and the anthem. I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, as we've discussed before, Dan, welcomes to country have their place. When I was Health Minister or Prime Minister and I was in a remote part of Australia, it was perfectly natural for people to welcome me to Arrernte country or wherever I might have been, the Tiwi Islands, wherever, in the same way as if you go to a function in the Town Hall of Adelaide, the Lord Mayor will welcome you to Adelaide. But
not anymore.
The truth
you
is,
get welcome to whatever the local. You don't get welcome to Adelaide anymore. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what the Indigenous name for Adelaide is. There probably wouldn't have been an Indigenous name for Adelaide because Adelaide didn't exist back in pre-colonial times. There would have been, no doubt, a number of clan groups who lived in the area of Adelaide, and it's quite common for these clan groups to be at odds with each other on what actually should be the name. I can remember as a party leader having to adjudicate in disputes between different Indigenous groups about whether who actually was the traditional owners of Canberra, for instance. But Canberra, incidentally, is an Indigenous name, or it's an Indigenous derived name, as are so many of our place names. Anyway, we're getting off on a tangent here. You're right about the national anthem on Australia Day, Dan. If there's one day when the national anthem certainly should be played at any major event, sporting, civic, whatever, it's Australia Day.
Hi, thanks for watching. Did you know that 3/4 of you watching this podcast aren't currently subscribed to the IPA's YouTube channel? So do us a favour, hit subscribe and you won't miss any of the action. While you're at it, head to ipa.org.au, follow the prompts to subscribe to the IPA's website, so that way you will find all of our research and analysis. Now back to the chat.
Indeed. Let's go to the international front, Tony. Iran, the peace, as it were, was very short-lasting, sadly. There's been a lot of developments, but basically the US has commenced strikes. Trump had one of his ideas, I guess you could call it, of having a 20% levy on ships coming through the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for what he would consider to be US protection of it, which was quickly backed away from and dispensed with. So obviously it's a fast-moving beast. I think the last time we talked, or maybe the time before, you had, I think, foreshadowed the likelihood that this peace or the temporary ceasefire was not going to be lasting, and you've been proven correct given the ambitions and motivations of the Iranian regime. So, Tony, where to from here for the US and for the West?
Well, Dan, there is never going to be peace in the Middle East while the apocalyptic Islamists are in charge in Tehran. They are absolutely bent in the marrow of their being on the destruction of Israel, on death to America, and on the creation, as far as they can possibly bring it about, of a global caliphate, which would turn out to be deadly, not just to all non-Muslims, but to everyone who doesn't share their particular brand of Islam. So there's really only one way forward here, and that is to redouble efforts to bring about regime change in Iran. Now, the restoration of the US naval blockade on Iran is a good thing. But really, what I think needs to happen is for the US president to speak to America's traditional allies, particularly Australia, Britain, some of the other NATO partners, try to put together a coalition of the willing to protect freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, and then to deliberately, purposefully, and methodically ask what is necessary to bring about regime change inside Iran. We know that earlier in the year, there were massive anti-regime demonstrations. We know that earlier in the year, at a word from the current Shah of Iran, the exiled Shah of Iran, the son of the late Shah, hundreds of thousands of people turned out in the street. I suspect there would be elements inside the Iranian apparatus, perhaps people who have in the past been in contact with the Israelis. I think there really needs to be much deep thought given to what is necessary to bring about regime change inside Iran, and it needs to be methodically gone about. Whether that is the occupation of some strategic points on the Gulf coastline, Karg Island perhaps, the islands at the head of the Gulf near the Straits of Hormuz, whether this is arming some of the dissident groups inside Iran, one way or another, we will not have a safer world and a peaceful Middle East until the Islamist theocracy, the apocalyptic Islamist theocracy in Iran is gone. And while I can understand that presidents have a lot on their plate and they have many things to concern themselves with, particularly, I suppose, with midterm elections coming up, in the end, the job of leadership is to focus on the necessary and the important, not simply on the politically urgent.
All right, let's go from Tehran to London, where you were for a few days with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference, which is an annual conference held in London, bringing together a lot of global leaders, if you like, on the centre right or broadly of a conservative disposition to survey the situation of the West and chart a way forward. I think this is the third conference of that nature, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I know you're intimately involved in this. I'm interested in if you could share with us what was, I guess, the themes or what were some of the takeaways that you had from your time there?
Well, Dan, you're right. This has been, I think, an important innovation. It's unlike almost any other conference that I've been to. There are lots of conferences about politics. There are lots of conferences about economics, lots of conferences about geostrategy, if you like. This is a conference which really focuses on culture, because we know that politics is downstream of culture. And it's also in an important sense, a conference which touches on spiritual issues, because in the end, culture is downstream of faith. Not a preachy conference, but nevertheless a conference which is aware of the importance of faith in all its forms playing out in the wider world. And in particular, the need for us in the West to believe in ourselves and to rediscover some of the important creative genius of Western civilization, if it is to survive. I suppose that the theme of all three of these conferences has been that we are living through a civilizational moment, and that without a recovery of faith in ourselves, we are doomed to managed decline at best. And given that the long Anglo-American ascendancy, I suppose, dominance of the West in the wider world for at least the last couple of centuries has produced, on balance, a world which is more free, more fair, more rich and more safe for more people than ever before, I certainly think it is critically important for the broad West, but particularly the Anglosphere, to rediscover that faith. Because whatever we might think of the current American presidency, whatever anxieties we have about these times, the world that's been shaped by the long Anglo-American ascendancy is a world which has adopted so many of the better elements that Britain and America have given to the world. And much as I admire the Chinese people and much as I respect Chinese culture, look at the Chinese polity and ask yourself this question: would a world that more resembles China be an improvement on the world that we've got? And the fact that so many Chinese people who can want to get a Western passport, want to get assets out of their country, want to get a bolt hole in the West, I think gives you a pretty clear answer.
Just also, you were there in the UK at a pretty interesting time, as it always is there, but the resignation of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister to make way for Andy Burnham, who will take on that role in the near future. Also, I'm not sure if you were there when this happened, but when Nigel Farage announced he was standing down to recontest, given the what he would describe as being a very unfair witch hunt of his activities, which I considered to be a fairly wise, astute move on his behalf, because I think he could see what was coming. But I'm just very interested. It's very tumultuous in the UK. There is obviously a lack of political leadership there, as there is here at the present moment. What's your sense of how it's going there politically and culturally? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
Look, you won't be surprised for me to revel in being a bit of an incorrigible Anglophile, Dan. I think that in an important sense, Britain remains, if you like, the mother culture of the West. And I think that a strong and successful Britain is very important for the strength and prosperity and security of the wider world. You're right, Britain is at a low ebb. They've been plagued by poor government, economic stagnation, social fragmentation, strategic weakness, as indeed other countries have. But in a sense, they've probably sunk further, faster in the last few years than others. I think that under Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party is staging a revival, which very few would have expected a couple of years back when they so catastrophically lost their election. Anyone who's been closely following British politics, I think, would be very impressed by the quality of Kemi Badenoch's strength and leadership. I know Nigel Farage quite well, and I have a lot of time for him as someone who really drove the whole Brexit movement that I think was important for the restoration of British sovereignty and indeed self-respect. But that said, you can understand people's anxieties when there are when there's a lot of money changing hands. So, look, without getting into the ins and outs of the by-election he's triggered in his seat, I would generally say don't give up on Britain. Just as I would also say never despair of America. Just as I would say of our own country, if you can't be optimistic about Australia, you can't be optimistic about anywhere. And I just think that great countries have got enormous resilience, got enormous powers of recovery, and you should back them not just to survive, but to flourish.
Okay, so a conservative revival in the UK, perhaps. Is there going to be, under your presidency, a Liberal revival here in Australia? How's it going as president so far? You've been in the role now for a couple of months. Do you reckon it's the Titanic's being turned around as it's been described? What are your objectives as president, and what are you doing to try to meet some of those objectives at the moment?
Well, Dan, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of work to be done, and I think the party's current troubles have been 10 years in the making. I'm currently just finishing reading Paul Kelly's latest tome on the Liberal Party's period in government, and I've got to say, it sometimes makes depressing reading. It sometimes induces in me a little bit of PTSD. Now, problems that have been 10 years in the making are not going to be fixed overnight. But I am confident that Angus Taylor is now well embarked on what's needed to demonstrate to the Australian people that we are by far the most credible alternative government. I think his budget reply speech is well worth rereading. He copped a bit of criticism for his speech to the Sydney Institute last week, but when you actually read it carefully, the vast majority of that speech was a very powerful economic critique of the current government, which he says rightly has got the country on an economic doom loop. They're making our businesses less efficient with their union changes. They're damaging our competitiveness with their insane energy policy. They're actively subverting the industries, the resource industries that have been the foundation of our prosperity. So I think in that respect, Angus is absolutely focused on the need for much better economic policy. Now, in the process, he made some observations about whether other parties on the right were really credible alternative governments, and I think that's a perfectly sensible thing to do. As for my role, Dan, as the president, my job is to try to ensure that the organisation of the party is in tip-top shape. And that means we've got to have more members, we've got to have better candidates, we've got to have better campaigning, and we've got to be adequately funded to do the job. And I think where it all starts is more people joining the political party of their choice and doing what they can to make that party the best it can be. I've been a member of the Liberal Party for about 40 years now, Dan, and I can't remember any significant Liberal leader going out to the country and saying to every Australian, if you normally vote Liberal, if you are interested in our public life, please join the party and make a difference. And that's my message. I can't guarantee that our party will be perfect, but I can guarantee that it will be better for the presence of more good people in it.
When it comes to, I guess, the direction of the Liberal Party under Angus Taylor, it does seem very much like in the UK, where the pressure from Farage has, got the Tories to dump net zero, to say they're going to cut immigration. Isn't it sort of the same here? I mean, I guess a cynical observer would say that the only reason why the party's moving in that direction is because of the electoral pressure being put on by One Nation that's sort of dragging them in that direction. And I think you see in the community hesitancy, which is they'll say, we agree with some of the policies being put out, but we don't really think the Liberal Party's fair dinkum about actually getting the job done. How do you sort of, how would you meet some of those challenges that is sometimes put out there?
Well, Dan, Pauline Hanson is not the only person who's been a skeptic about net zero. You might remember someone saying some years ago that the so-called settled science of climate change is, quote, absolute crap. You might remember that someone in the Liberal Party abolished a carbon tax. You might remember that someone in the Liberal Party stopped the illegal migrant boats. You might remember that someone in the Liberal Party has been calling for years for much lower migration. So this idea that the only person who's ever had these ideas is the leader of One Nation is nonsense. What we've seen under Angus Taylor is the Liberal Party yet once again be true to itself, once again regain its fighting spirit, once again go out into the country and say, this is what we believe, join us, make it happen, let's build a better Australia.
Well, just to play devil's advocate one more time, yes, you did all those things as Prime Minister, but then there would be those who say, well, sometimes the Liberal Party is a bit schizophrenic because the same party that abolished the carbon tax also gave us net zero as an example. And so there is that thing in the community, which is, okay, we voted for Tony Abbott, but we got Malcolm Turnbull. There's I think, still a concern that, okay, let's say people think Angus is the guy, he's going to, run a strong centre-right party. But we know that within the party, there are still these forces that support net zero, that support mass migration, that don't want to take on the woke cultural issues. That there's that hesitancy there, and some people would look at One Nation, particularly on an issue like immigration, and say, well, they've had one consistent view, whereas the Liberal Party sometimes has changed. So I think that's some of the I guess hesitancy that might be in the community still.
And likewise, Dan, you could say, well, the Deputy Prime Minister, when the coalition foolishly embraced net zero, is now in the One Nation party. Does that mean that One Nation is confused about net zero? The most recent One Nation person elected to Parliament seems to believe in higher migration, not lower migration. Does that mean that One Nation is confused? Look, all political parties are, in a sense, coalitions. The important thing is, what is the current direction of a political party? Is it credibly led by people of competence and conviction? And I think there's absolutely no doubt that for the first time in a decade, there's competence, conviction, and courage. I would challenge anyone who doubts where the Liberal Party at the moment is going to go back and listen to Angus Taylor's budget reply speech, read the full version of his speech to the Sydney Institute last week, listen, if you would, to his 7:30 report discussion this week. This is obviously a guy of high intelligence, of great ability, and determination to build a better Australia, to put Australia first. I'm much more optimistic about my side of politics, and because I'm more optimistic about my side of politics, I'm frankly more hopeful for our country, because I absolutely believe, Dan, that if we do want a better Australia, and surely we should, we remain the best hope of better government in this country.
Just one last topic I want to get your thoughts on. We're not going to have time to do it the justice that it deserves, but we've got the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism that's underway and receiving hearings and evidence and testimony. Some of the latest developments have been in relation to universities and just how terrible they have been as, I guess, hotbeds of anti-Semitism and division on their campus. My concern the whole time, and I think I've ventilated these thoughts with the Royal Commission, is that I think inevitably, yes, there'll be important information that comes out, but we're already starting to see the government using it as a smokescreen to implement their preconceived and previously rejected agenda to put in more so-called anti-hate speech laws and misinformation laws. And they've got what they're now calling a duty of care for social media companies, which is going to be a massive cudgel against free speech online. So that's always been my concern, is no doubt the Royal Commission will recommend something around speech and hate speech, and the government will say, well, see, we told you we need to regulate it even more. So I'm very sceptical of the utility of this process to actually produce better outcomes in our society. I'm interested in how you think this Royal Commission is going so far and whether you have any reflections on the evidence that's been given.
Dan, like you, I think it's important that people are allowed to tell their story, and listening or reading about the experiences of many Jewish Australians over the last couple of years is pretty harrowing. And the fact that people in authority have not taken stronger action to crack down on this, I think is wrong. It's been a failure of leadership at many different levels. Like you, Dan, I'm a skeptic about yet more hate speech laws, because the hate speech laws we already have in abundance have been employed in a very one-sided way. When have the Islamist hate preachers been prosecuted, as opposed to the odd, perhaps over-the-top Christian person getting into trouble? Look, again, the important thing here is the quality and character of the national leaders. And if you've got national leaders who are climate and identity obsessives, you're not going to get any good come out of whatever the laws are that they pass. More likely than not, these laws will be misused for bad purposes. So, excuse me, Dan, I think what we really need at every level is more clear-sighted leadership that's immersed in our history, appreciates the best traditions of our country, and is determined to build on our strengths. What we really need in Australia today is a restoration of the best qualities of our country. We need our country and our people individually and collectively to be their best selves. And we know that the sort of things that we've seen since October the 7th, culminating in the Bondi massacre, are utterly at odds with the Australia that we know and love.
Well, on that note, Tony, we'll leave it there for this week, and no doubt we'll return to this topic in weeks to come. So thank you very much for your time and insights as always, and looking at catching up again shortly.
As always, thanks, Dan.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.